Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we got to talk about potentially replacing two elite defensive backs for the Eagles in 2022. Offseason options continues on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Wednesday edition of the show. I'm Louis DiBiase alongside my co-host Gino Camilleri. Monday through Friday, we got an Eagles podcast for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Today continues our offseason option series, getting you ready for next week's free agency start. Monday is the tampering window, and Gino, that's really when all the main announcements are made. Players can verbally agree to deals. Tuesday is the official start of free agency at 4 p.m. Teams and players can officially start to agree on contracts. The Eagles have a lot of free agents on both sides of the ball, and we're kind of talking about replacing a lot of these guys over the last few days, Gino. That's been the theme and the vibe around, circles in the NFL and rumors and reports from, media members and Adam Schefter said it himself today on 97.5 The Fanatic. Most people do not expect the Eagles to keep a lot of these free agents they have on defense, including Javon Hargrave, James Bradberry, and now, unfortunately, even Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who I thought was going to be the main guy the Eagles really pushed to keep. It's not over. Again, we've heard nothing from the Eagles camp, and we won't probably still for a bit, but that's probably the reality the Eagles are facing.
It just seemed too weird with the way that they operated, that they didn't give any of these guys extensions in the regular season, that maybe we should have seen that where there was smoke, there was fire, that inevitably these guys were going to find their way out of Philadelphia. And Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's a big one. And
he's posting a lot on social media, Gino. He posts the "Thank you, Philly" tweet. He removes.
He better
be
clowning us. He better be clowning.
That's his personality, so it's really hard to gauge. But AJ Brown is commenting on his Instagram like, "Go make money for your family," and it doesn't look good.
For what they gave up last year, Lou, in not getting that extension done at the time, it was one of those things where you're like, okay, maybe leaving it till the end of the season. If he does and come play on a contract year, have a contract-esque season, he might price his way out, which he did. Would you have liked to get that contract extension done last year when you traded for him? Of course. I know this one is going to hurt folks. I love Chauncey Gardner-Johnson.
You especially.
Go back and listen to all of our shows from that draft class. We love CGJ. We picked him in our Locked On NFL mock draft in the first round.
And then he was elite for this team for 1 year.
And he was elite, and he was the guy, and we thought he was the next Brian Dawkins type of player. But if the Eagles just don't have the money and can't shell out that $15 million that he is going to get, you're going to have to find replacements. So trying to make light of this, there are a ton of free agents in this class.
We'll get into them. Yeah.
And there's a lot of them that were my guys as well a couple years ago in the draft. And hopefully, we know safeties at the top level have gotten those insane numbers, the Marcus Williams of the world that have got that $15 million. I'm sure Jordan Poyer will get something along those lines. Same with CGJ. But the secondary safety market has seemed to be one of those kind of bargain bin type of, you go into Walmart and you see all these films, you're like, man, how can I get like The Revenant for $1.50? Like that's what you're going to hope for.
That's how they got CGJ, that's the thing that's how they got Malcolm Jenkins and Roddy McLeod. And that's probably the avenue they're going to have to go again. That's just, and it sucks. This Eagles roster in 2022 was perfect, and losing a lot of these guys makes that Super Bowl loss even harder to stomach. Cause you're like, man, that group really isn't going to be together forever. And that's definitely unfortunate. You don't want to lose two elite defensive backs in 1 year that took this team to another level in James Bradberry and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. But look, losing Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, James Bradberry, Javon Hargrave, potentially Isaac Seumalo, a lot of these players, that is the reality when you have to pay a quarterback. You're seeing the Bills. They're going to lose Jordan Poyer and Tremaine Edmonds. The Kansas City Chiefs said, we are not going to pay $24+ million to Tyreek Hill. We're going to get a bunch of B cost-effective receivers. This is the reality when you have a Jalen Hurts And that's why a Pittsburgh Steelers can probably afford to pay a Tremaine Edmonds or a James Bradberry, is because they don't have that quarterback. So does it suck? Absolutely. Not being able to keep this team intact is unfortunate because that team was special and it was perfect. But that's the reality when you got to pay a quarterback and when pretty much all your value signings, trades, and draft picks all hit. You just can't keep all those guys when they hit that ceiling. They're going to cash in.
They're going to cash in, and now it's looking like the route that they're going to go and try and keep a Marcus Epps, try and keep a TJ Edwards.
I just thought they'd be able to keep one of the big fish, but
you would have hoped so.
I guess you got to remember too, Devontae Smith needs a big deal soon.
Right,
Landon Dickerson.
Right.
There are
the
guys
reality
on the
is Howie Roseman knows that the only way he can compete moving forward with this 25% of his salary cap allocated to his quarterback is to continue to build through the draft. And clearly they don't have the amount of picks that they want this year. They're clearly not happy in that room with how many picks that they have this year. So you're going to have to try and invest in next year. And how do you do it? Well, unless you trade one of your players away, unless you trade down or up in the draft, however you want to go about it, you're going to have to go through the comp pick realm. And look at the New England Patriots, Lou, in the the early 2000s to the 2010s when they were really that dynasty. That was their method of operations. They let those guys walk. And then, hey, in 1 to 2 years, if that team that signed him wants to get out from underneath them, I mean, how many times has Jamie Collins played for New England at this point? I think it's 3 or 4.
Kyle Van Noy.
Yeah, Kyle Van Noy.
I mean, they just recycle. And Gino, also look at why the Eagles struggled after 2017 is when they lost a lot of those value guys that cashed in, they couldn't replace them, right? The Mike Wallaces, the LJ Forts, the Haloti Nadas, everything they tried to do because once Carson Wentz gets that contract, like you said, you've got to hit on your value signings. You got to hit on trades like a CGJ for a 4th round pick. Find a guy that's still on a rookie deal that's in his prime and for some reason fell out of favor. You got to nail your draft classes. Howie did not do that last time. So this is gut check time. He did it last year. Can he replicate it again? He's going to have to because his quarterback is going to get that mega deal. But Gino, I think the biggest reason the Eagles couldn't sustain success is because the quarterback they gave a contract to couldn't sustain that level of play. So even with all of that being said, with all the guys that didn't work out in Philly after 2017, if Carson Wentz was great, they still were going to keep making the playoffs. That's why I'm still calm. It sucks to lose these guys, but if Jalen Hurts is an elite quarterback, if you have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith in this offensive line that's intact, I'm still not worried in this conference that the Eagles are still going to run things for the foreseeable future.
And that's why you have to be excited about it, because the idea that the quarterback, rising tides lifts all boats, that's what your quarterback is. And you made the point about Patrick Mahomes where you can go and bring in these Juju Smith-Schusters, trade for a Kadarius Toney, because you have that guy that can elevate them. That's why those Packers teams, after they had the Devontae Adams, Jordy Nelson crews where, I mean, they just, at one point, they had like 5 or 6 receivers deep, one of the best offensive lines, one of the best run game in football. And then Rodgers gets his contract and he's still able to elevate the play of the guys around him. Tom Brady is still able to elevate the play of the guys around him. And it's going to be a cohesive effort, Lou, because it falls on the coaching staff now, knowing going forward that they aren't going to have this huge arsenal of players that they had last year. It's going to have to be on the general manager, who seems to be pretty self-aware from his wrongs that he did the last time around, where he didn't have those picks. He didn't nail the ones the right way. It seems that this time around, they know what the plan is. They know that they were going to have to take some big hits in this free agent window. But where they are top heavy are the positions that are the most important. And you could just continue to build that depth through the draft. If you walk away with 16 draft picks over the next 2 years, you hope to hit 3 to 4, maybe 5 undrafted free agents in that period. You grab a couple veterans that will help you plug up the holes along the way. And you hope with those first premium picks that you have, 3 firsts in the next 2 years, 2 seconds over the next 2 years, or 3 rather, another third going into next year too, as well as this one. You got to nail those picks, because the Eagles don't have the quantity that they've had in the past, But when they've been tasked to get those quality draft picks, Lou, I look at 2018.
It's got to be a 2018 like draft.
You
for
hope
sure.
that you can replicate something to that manner.
Yeah. And it's not to say when you pay a quarterback that suddenly you have to go cheap everywhere and there's no money to spend. I mean, me and you talk about all the time how the cap goes up every year and you can backload contracts, you can front load deals. But the Eagles have a lot of money invested in more than just Jalen Hurts. You're paying A.J. Brown a ton of money. Dallas Goedert. You look at the offensive line, Jordan Mailata, Jason Kelsey if he comes back, Lane Johnson, Hassan Reddick, and Josh Sweat are under contract. Darius Slay is under contract. So they are allocating a lot of money to other core pieces as well. That's a part of, too, why we're not panicking, even though it's unfortunate you're losing these players. So the reality is when you have a perfect roster with 22 stud starters, you just can't pay everybody. I just really wish CGJ is the one especially. It's going to suck losing Bradberry and Hargrave too, but CGJ is tough because I feel like in his prime, a guy that led the league in interceptions, can play so many different roles, and was really coming into his own as a tackler in the playoffs too, which is where he was struggling. That kind of personality, I think, really fit in with Philadelphia. And so I wish he was the guy they could have kept. I know when they pay quarterbacks and when things get tight, they value paying other positions, but I thought maybe they would be willing to cash in because last year they tried to pay Marcus Williams top market money. So, and again, it's not over. I mean, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson hasn't signed with anybody, but from what Adam Schefter said, I take that with a lot of heart there that it's likely they're going to lose most of these guys.
I put that out there on Twitter today that you won't feel the effects of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson being gone until he actually is gone. And it's going
so we don't have to go back to Anthony Harris and
you would hope,
Rodney McLeod combo,
and that's the thing that drives me nuts at this position is that you thought you had that long-term pillar that you can grow with and continue to mold, where cornerback is probably the next position where you're going to have to add there. But you have bodies still. You have Darius Slay still playing at a very high level. You could get by with Zach McPherson if you need to for a little bit next year on top of some veteran free agents. Avonte Maddox is paid at this point. Defensive line, you have young guys that you could fill in.
Right.
Linebacker, you have Nakobe Dean. You literally have nobody. I mean, Reed Blankenship, hats off to him. He made the roster 53, UDFA, plays in the Super Bowl.
And remember, Gino, their roster wasn't complete last year until August.
No, it wasn't. No,
we're not going to panic now in March like people did last year. There's a lot of options, and that's what we're going to get into coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Offseason options continues with safety and cornerback. Guys, today's show is sponsored by FanDuel, the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. The midway point of the NBA season is past us now. It's the playoff push. It's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything you want. The Philadelphia 76ers are red hot. Are you drinking that Kool-Aid? They beat Milwaukee. Do you think they can do it in a playoff series? Put your money where your mouth is with FanDuel. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA, the NFL, and now the Locked On Podcast Network. This is the Locked On Eagles podcast. Gino, we're continuing our offseason options series. We talked about Chauncey Gardner-Johnson in segment 1. He's throwing out a lot of cryptic Instagram posts and Twitter posts and changing his bio from Eagles safety to NFL safety. Who knows if the Eagles can pay him? Adam Schefter doubts that he's going to stay. So let's live in the hypothetical world where CGJ is gone. How do they replace him? Marcus Epps is also a free agent. The report is that a number of teams are enamored with his run defense and his improvements in coverage last year. I think, number one, before we even get into how you replace CGJ, I really think if they lose Gardner-Johnson, they got to bring Epps back.
It has to be priority.
You can't lose both.
No, you can't go into the next season without one of those guys back there. And not just because of the level of play, but, I mean, the leadership. Marcus Epps has been a great developmental piece who's really been a big-time player. Since Malcolm Jenkins has left, he has had to pick up that role, and it's not an easy task. And before Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was here, it was a banged up Rodney McLeod, Anthony Harris, who was on the wrong side of his career.
Yeah.
And the most, I would say, even keeled one of the group was Marcus Epps, that we were saying week after week, you're like, man, this guy, he's making some plays. He's making some plays. And now we're saying, okay, he might truly be your number one safety until we see how free agency plays out and the draft. But I would say, Lou, I'm 100% with you. You have to keep at least one of those two guys. If you aren't going to invest that money into Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, you're going to have allocated resources that you would hope to put towards the safety position, starting with Marcus Epps and a pretty deep free agent class, Lou. I mean, if you're going to talk about having to replace one player in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, it isn't just like Marcus Williams or bust like it was last year. There's a boatload of guys out there that we have mentioned on these airwaves plenty of times.
There's a lot of Gino Camilleri, my guys at safety. Yep. Gino, you look at the guy you pounded the table for all of 2019. There were a lot of them at safety, but the main one I think was Nasir Adderley. Only 26 years old. He's a Philly native. Could be that Kazir White, Hassan Riddick this year as opposed to last year. And I think he'd be more cost effective than CGJ. There's Juan Thornhill. There's a number of guys that you liked in that 2019 class, along with CGJ.
Yeah, I think if you just go down the list, Lou, let's talk about the heavy hitters. You have Jesse Bates, Poyer, Jimmy Ward. I still think he's going to garner some money. I mean, he's playing at an unbelievable level.
My logic with that, though, is if you're going to target those guys, just pay CGJ.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I think those guys fall outside of that bracket.
Agreed.
If I'm looking at somebody, Lou, if you want to go that younger route, I go with that entire 2019 class. Like, you can get any one of those guys.
Because Juan Thornhill's in there, too.
Yep, Juan Thornhill is in there as well. He just beat you in the Super Bowl. But you can go down the list, Lou. Adrian Amos, he's still 30 years old. Another Gino guy. Von Bell from the Bengals. Both of those Bengals safeties are free agents. They played at a high level. Terrell Edmonds, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but he's only 26 years old. They were interested in him last year. I know he was going to go back to Pittsburgh, so he ended up signing there. You continue to go down this list. Kareem Jackson, Johnny Johnson III, another local guy that was just released by the Browns, who wouldn't count
interest in him too.
Yep, and he wouldn't count towards the compensatory pick formula because he was released. And I think that might be the route that they want to take. I'd be really interested in Johnny Johnson, especially because he was released. He's not going to get towards that number that he was at on the Browns, which was, I think it was a little north of $10 million.
Well, yeah, because the Eagles 2 years ago were gunning for him, but Cleveland gave him a nice deal.
Oh, yeah, they gave him a lot of money, and the talk was that he was a local kid and bring him back. Lou, one that I am like, you want the prophecy of...
I already know which one.
Of Marcus Mariota?
Yeah.
I loved Eric Rowe. I thought he was released too early, and I just didn't think he fit what the Philadelphia Eagles were trying to do.
He was the Rasul Douglas before Rasul Douglas, where he was a safety that was being forced to play corner. Miami moved him to safety like he played at Utah a lot of the time, and he looked pretty good over the last few years.
He's been like that Marcus Epps type of player that's just been consistently good for the last couple of years in Miami, and that's the quality of player you're going to have to get, Lou. If you can say, take that $13 million, let's say Chauncey Gardner-Johnson gets per year, and divide that up over two safeties, I think you could get Marcus Epps and one of those guys that we had talked about. I mean, Ronnie Harrison. If you want a reunion with Rodney McLeod for dirt cheap just to have a body back there, you can do that too. If Jabril Peppers is your cup of tea, I mean, you could go down the list. There are players that can still play. And you can't go into next year with Kevon Wallace and Reed Blankenship being your number 2 and your number 3.
No, and they won't.
It doesn't have to be a top level guy, Lou, but it has to be somebody that has played good enough ball that you believe can come in and at least maybe take 50% of what Chauncey did. It's not going to be a one guy does all, one person fixes all. It's going to be a committee type of approach to fill in what he did, but you're still going to have to get a guy that can cover on the back end, somebody that can match up in one-on-one against tight ends, against bigger wide receivers. Lou, without Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, do they win those games down the stretch where they don't have Avonte
Maddox is out? No. And that's my thing is I know the Eagles have gone the route of, even with Malcolm Jenkins, they had a certain ceiling. This is what we're going to pay you. Mm-hmm. He found more with New Orleans, so he was let go. I think Rodney McLeod, a value free agent signing. Anthony Harris, even Marcus Epps. even Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, you only trade a 4th-round draft pick for him, and he's still on that rookie deal. I know they've gone the value route, but when those guys have hit, you've seen the value of Rodney McLeod, of Malcolm Jenkins, of CGJ. That player is worth a big contract. The thing is, the Eagles have had some success finding them for cheaper that I think that's going to emphasize or encourage them even more to try to continue that route. But I've seen the years where you had Jalen Mills back there and Anthony Harris, and when you didn't have that CGJ level player, it hurts your defense. So I know the Eagles see it too, because they also have years, like I said last year, they wanted to pay Marcus Williams. It changes when you have a quarterback, but like you said, I mean, CGJ was a player that was playing deep cover 2 the majority of the year, getting interceptions, and then he's back to playing slot corner, and he didn't skip a beat. And then in the playoffs, he needed to be their best tackler, and he was that too. So I hope they don't have to replace him in free agency or the draft, but it's likely, Gino. The draft is an option too. You got 2 firsts and a second. I mean, Brian Branch from Alabama, the other Bama kid, Jordan Battle, Antonio Johnson from Texas A&M. I could see them going that 30th pick or that 2nd-round selection and trying safety.
Let me throw this out for you. I read this today, and boy, did it get me excited. You call up a team that happens to be a little south of Philadelphia, also in the NFC. They're in the NFC South, and they're in Carolina. And they have a safety by the name of Jeremy Chin. What if you back-to-back years, Lou? Hey, guy's on the end of his rookie deal. Panthers aren't going to be competing anytime soon.
Unless they go for Rodgers, man. Apparently that's the rumor. Carolina wants Rodgers.
Do they compete even with him?
In that division, probably.
Yeah, in that division.
But I'm with you, man. Trust me. I want Jeremy Chin?
Do you pick up the phone? Do you pick up the phone? I mean, you got to try. It's cost-effective at least for a year, and then next year. You figure that out moving forward. But, Lou, I do want to say one thing to kind of tie this whole why were they willing to pay $15 million to Marcus Williams, but they're not willing to pay that to Chauncey Gardner-Johnson now? Yeah. Well, they know now that they have a quarterback. They weren't 100% sure.
That's true.
They knew that they could dole out some money at that time.
They didn't know if they'd be shelling out this kind of money in a
now they know
year.
We have $50 million on our salary cap that is going to be.
Yeah, because they thought maybe we have to take a rookie in 2023, and there's 5 more years of cost-effective QB play. So or we signed Jalen Hurts to I'm glad it didn't happen, but a Daniel Jones mid-tier level contract. So, yeah, I think that's a good point. I still hope that there's some chance they can get CGJ, but I think a lot of the names we've mentioned here is probably what they're going to be gunning for. Jon Johnson, Nasir Adderley, Juan Thornhill, Adrian Amos, Eric Rowe. Although, do you know one thing about Eric Rowe to wrap this up? That was a Chip Kelly pick, 2015, right?
Oh, it was. But
so Howie, there's no way that ego brings him.
Yeah, back. Good point, Lou. Hey, maybe he completely lays down his sword and just is the ultimate.
Yeah, it's been a long time. It's been 8 years. Maybe he's over it. I mean, he won a ring.
Think about that, Lou. It's almost
he clearly won that war. So I mean, But
it's been a decade since Chip Kelly got hired. Think about that.
Yeah, time flies, man. The fact that we're talking about Eric Rowe in 2023 is weird for sure. Gino, the Eagles still have work to do in the defensive backfield at corner as well. James Bradberry, we've been saying for a month or two now, is likely out the door, almost 100%. So how do they replace him? We've talked about the draft. We're going to talk about some free agent options coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles with off-season options, secondary edition, talking about how the Eagles might have to potentially replace Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and or Marcus Epps at the safety position. Gino at corner, they've got Darius Slay and Avonte Maddox entrenched in the slot and on the boundary. James Bradberry was an all-pro last year, a great one-year signing from the Eagles, but that all-pro season is going to have him likely cash in with another team that's just going to be too rich for the Eagles' blood. So we've talked for weeks now about the corner position of the draft. It's a loaded class. We both think they need to spend one of those top 3 picks on this class, whether it's 10, 30, or that second round pick. But I could also see them, free agency comes before the draft. I could see them trying to replicate what they did with Bradberry last year and saying, can we find a veteran that's on a prove it 1-year deal, like a Marcus Peters who was hurt with Baltimore last year, that's had some good years lately, but maybe wants to, wait and maximize his value by signing a 1-year deal now, or Patrick Peterson, who had a pretty good year with a bad secondary in Minnesota last year. I think those options are still on the table. I don't think they completely ignore corner until the draft. That's just, they're not going to, because again, they don't want to force need in the draft.
No, you're not going to force. We have to pick a cornerback. I ultimately do think that they do pick a cornerback at the end of the day. But if we're going under that moniker and under what the Eagles have done in the past of trying to get a under the radar guy, and they tried that with Steven Nelson for 2 years, which was beyond me as to why. Was that just 1 year? Or was that
1 year? Just 2021.
Okay, just 1 year. It felt like 2 years. It felt like an eternity. They were on the wrong side of that with him, but on the very best side of it with James Bradberry to ultimately where it's going to get them a third round comp pick in 2024. Right. Lou, if I'm picking one of those guys, somebody that just got released today that has a familiarity with the system that Sean Desai is going to run, Shaquille Griffin.
Mm-hmm. Thought about that
Seahawk, too. Released by the Jaguars today. He was around $13 million on their cap. They had to free up some space. Are you thinking, hey, maybe if a team doesn't go crawling to him and they're more enamored with James Bradberry and some of these other names on the market, that, hey, you could get him for $6-7 million on a 1-year deal and maybe get another third-round comp pick if he performs to 75% of what James Bradberry did?
Right. I think that's another option. Byron Murphy's out there from Arizona. Not a CB1. I think he was a first-round pick, right? Definitely didn't meet the ceiling that Arizona placed on him. But at the same time,
25 too.
He's only 25 years old, and he's good. He's definitely not great, but for what the Eagles could need here, because, again, great and long-term greatness, they're going to have to find in the draft. I think he also could fit the bill of what they're looking for. They just got to bring in somebody that has starting experience that isn't, the Bradley Fletcher, Nolan Carroll, Jalen Mills type. Are you going to land another James Bradberry as CB2? Likely not. But I think, again, though, Gino, cornerback, there's options in free agency, maybe even through trades. We'll look into trades, too, down the road, because Howie's always looking into that avenue as well to add talent. But this one really has to be about the draft. Safety, I could see them drafting one with those first 3 picks, but again, this class I think is just too good. And with Darius Slay's age as well, you got to add one in the draft. You just have to.
Yeah, you definitely do. And at the same time, I think you have to bring in a veteran competition, because at the end of the day, you don't want it to be Zach McPherson and a rookie cornerback having to deploy on the outside, much like the years of 2018 where one of those names, Chandon Sullivan, Lou, is a free agent. Like, heck, would he be a decent name?
Can you imagine if they signed Chandon Sullivan and Eric Rowe?
Hey, time is a flat circle, and football is especially. But you have to go into this offseason, Lou, and
bring in Nelson Aguilar as a receiver. They just reunion central, baby.
Yeah, you have to trust your pro scouting department, because this is a huge transition year, not just for your coaching staff, not just for your front office, but for the players as well. I mean, there's going to be a lot of guys that weren't in that locker room last year, and you don't know if Fletcher Cox, a longtime leader, is going to be there next year. You really don't know anything outside of Jalen Hurts, and that offense is going to be sticking around. So for the defense, you just have to continue to bring in guys that are going to compete, because it seems over the last couple of years when they do bring in competition and good level of competition, I think Kaiser White, TJ Edwards, for example, they got the best out of each other in that year. And same with James Bradberry and Darius Slay, in my opinion. Don't bring in guys just to fill a Band-Aid. And they've done that in the past. Like the Mike Wallace signing, was there guys out there that were probably better suited to be signed to Philadelphia at that point? Oh, I am absolutely sure there were. But the Eagles were stuck in, we have to fill this need with trying to clone that exact player. No, it's going to be a transition year. You're going to change a lot of the things you do when it comes to the defense. You have to see what your defensive coordinator wants. You have to see what your new defensive backs coach wants. Now that you just lost your DBs coach to the Baltimore Ravens, things are going to change quickly in that defensive back room, Lou. But you still have Darius Slay, which you can rely on. You still have a young Avonte Maddox, which you can rely on. It is a big overhaul year, but you haven't spent high draft picks on the secondary in the backfield of the defense in nearly 20-something years. So you have to just go out there and finally invest picks, while at the same time bringing in guys that could potentially get you another, heck, even a 5th round comp pick. If that guy goes on and signs a $10 million deal, even an upgrade from, I don't know. I am so just stuck at what they're going to do on this position. And I have no idea what it's going to come through and what it's going to look like. I mean, Darius Slay,
I just hope
you're going to have to restructure that too. I don't know.
Yeah, we saw an elite. Yeah, there's a ton unknown. And, there's the rumor that they could hire Matt Patricia as their linebacker coach. Slay's going to want out if that's the case. So,
yeah,
there's a lot of unknowns. Somebody even suggested they might try to re-sign Bradberry and move on from Slay. So there's a lot of options on the table. I just hope that they don't go back, like you said, I know you got to find the value signings again, like you did with Bradberry and CGJ last year. I just hope they don't go back to what you said with, let's just sign Nolan Carroll for a year. We just got to get by for a year with Bradley Fletcher and Kerry Williams. Yes, you have to be more cost effective with some of these positions for sure, but I still want you to target a CGJ who's 24 years old and in his prime. And the situation is, specific to the point where he'd become available, like Jay Ajayi in Miami as well, to go back to 2017, or a Tim Jernigan. I don't want to just bring in a bunch of now like 33-year-olds that are just going to be super cheap, like you mentioned with Mike Wallace, where you just bring them in. Are they're going to be those kind of guys for sure, but I hope you can try to find the young guy that can still blossom, and then, like you said, cash in either with the Eagles or another team, and then you get a comp pick. Because I saw the secondary in 2022, how good it was. I don't want to go back to being average or a bottom tier team. I know that they believe in the trenches, but these positions, when you have elite players there, it makes your team all that more unstoppable.
Without a doubt. And I think we saw when that Eagles team is a no-fly zone, what the defensive front can do. It is such a give and take.
Like, of course, the pass rush makes the secondary, but the secondary makes the pass rush too.
You don't have that great season up front if you don't have the coverage on the back end. It's what we have been dying for over the last 4 years.
Back and forth relationship, man. It's give and take.
And Howie Roseman, it's a lot of give and take in that front office, man. And I can't sleep thinking about this, Lou. I don't know how he can sleep thinking about free agency. And we're going to
probably because he's a elite quarterback. I think that's how we sleep.
Yeah, we sleep knowing that Jalen Hurts is still a top 5 player in the league as we speak.
That's the thing. So we'll see what happens. We've got linebacker to talk about. We have running back and receiver still, both sides of the line. Offseason options continues tomorrow and throughout the week. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Eagles on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. On Twitter, at Locked On Birds, at GC24_football, and at DiBiase LOE. Thanks for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen, the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. They provide in-depth coverage of the biggest NFL prospects in the draft with deep dives into the sleepers and hidden gems that can change your favorite NFL team. Find Locked On NFL Draft wherever you get Locked On Eagles. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening. And let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.